Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk. And we just got done with a really cold snap here in North Texas, and there are a lot of people who are sick. I'm not fully sick, but I'm not feeling as great as I normally do. Probably sound a little nasally. Just a little bit of a head cold, I think, for me, but it's the time of the year that everyone's getting colds, the flu, COVID now. We're in the heart of it in the middle of January here in Texas. When we're sick physically, there's signs that we're sick. You might be dealing with a stuffy nose. You might get that cough, that sinus pressure, between your eyes, above your nose. I hate that. The nose might even be burning just because it's so irritated. Just in general, a headache. Your whole body aches when you're sick sometimes. Stomach ache, vomiting. I mean, I could go on and on and on. You know what it's like when you get sick. I was just bragging the other day that I hadn't been sick all winter, and normally I get sick once during the winter. And so I got it, I guess, but I don't really know how bad it is. Once again, just taking DayQuil and keeping up with the symptoms. A lot of people have it much worse. But it got me thinking, what if there's signs that we would know we're spiritually sick? I mean, when you're getting physically sick because, you wake up in the morning and you're like moving your eyes and your eyes ache. See, there's another symptom, right? But wouldn't it be nice if there are symptoms that would tell us if we're spiritually sick? Because I think there's a lot of people who are spiritually sick that don't realize they're sick. Now, when we're physically sick, you know it because you feel different than what you normally feel like. And it just would be great if we had that same alert system where our body, our mind, our soul was telling us if we were spiritually sick. Well, I think there are. I think there's symptoms. We just don't always necessarily relate those symptoms to being spiritually sick. So I thought I'd go through some of them in this episode of God Talk. And maybe it can help you to realize maybe if you got some spiritual sickness going on, maybe someone that you know or love does, you can kind of make them aware of it. And ultimately, when we're sick physically, we take certain things to make us not sick, or at least to make us feel better. And the same thing can be said when we realize that we're spiritually sick. There's certainly things that we can do to make that better as well. Let's start with fear and anxiety. If you're a person who struggles with a lot of fear and anxiety, I'm not trying to beat you down. It's no fun to struggle with that, but that tends to emanate ultimately from you don't believe that God is ultimately in control of the things that you're dealing with in your life. So if everyone's going to deal with it from time to time, but if you're constantly finding yourself in a state of fear and anxiety, that's probably like a sign of a headache or nausea or something like that. It's not necessarily that you're completely spiritually sick, but you have an element of spiritual sickness as a result of it. Well, what can we do about it? Well, we have to learn to hand things over to God. We have to learn to actually trust Him that His word is true, and that our lives are in His hands, and that He knows the number of hairs on our head, that a bird doesn't fall to the ground apart from His will, and that by worrying doesn't add a single hour or day to our lives. When we know that, when we understand that, the fear and anxiety level will go down. I think anger is another sign of spiritual sickness. Because God is love, right? And so once again, if you on occasion get angry, that's probably not the end of the world. I mean, we see God occasionally gets angry Himself. He's slow to anger. He abounds in love. So if you're just in general a nasty, angry, mean, ugly person, not talking about physical looks when I say ugly, talk about personality there, then that's probably a sign that you have some spiritual sickness going on, because we're called not to be angry. We're called to show love as God is love, and the way that God shows love to each and every one of us. Maybe you struggle with being hopeless. Man, that's a horrible feeling. When you don't have hope, it's just hard to really kind of go on with life. And hopelessness oftentimes leads even into depression. And I'm not saying that if you're a depressed individual or you're somewhat hopeless in terms of how you see your life and the world and so forth, I'm not saying you're not a Christian. I'm just saying you have some spiritual sickness going on because if we know who God is and trust Him with our lives, and if our satisfaction is based on our relationship with Him, not the things of this world, then we won't be hopeless because in Him we have hope, and that hope is eternal because it goes far beyond what goes on in this life. You know, the Apostle Paul talks about that he learned the secret to being content. And someone that is content isn't hopeless. They're filled with hope because ultimately their contentment is found in Jesus Christ. So I kind of lump three things together there, but maybe if you're a very discontent person, and they tend to be somewhat hopeless people and oftentimes can become very depressed people, all three of those things are probably signs of spiritual sickness. You know, a sign of spiritual sickness I can recognize in myself when it happens is sometimes you just don't want to pray. Or if you are a regular reader of the Bible and you just, it's your day or your time that you would normally read the Bible and you don't want to, that's usually a sign of some spiritual sickness. There's a reason why we don't want to talk to God, and there's reasons why we don't want to hear from God. We talk to Him in prayer. We hear from Him in His Word. And so if you are finding yourself where you're really not wanting to pray, or you're not wanting to read His Word, then you're probably having some anger and some resentment and some frustration to God, maybe even just some guilt in your own life about different things that you're doing. And there's a sign of some spiritual sickness there that you probably should pay attention to. Another sign that we might be having some spiritual sickness is that you're just not making God a priority in your life. Maybe you just are going to church once a month. And it's been 5 years since you've volunteered to serve in any kind of significant capacity at church. It's been years since you've even invited someone to come to church. These would be signs that there's some spiritual sickness there. God's not the priority that he ought to be in your life. And that kind of tells us something in terms of where our relationship is with God. It's not that it's horrible. It's not like your faith is on the deathbed, right? It's just spiritually sick. It's not strong. It could be better. Another big one, I think, when we think about the sign of spiritual sickness is just to consider the fruits of the Spirit. Because the fruits of the Spirit tell us when God's Spirit is active in our lives. And if God's Spirit's active in our lives, we're not going to be spiritually sick. It's almost like taking vitamins and antibiotics and all these other things. It's not that it's impossible to get spiritually sick if you're strong in the fruits of the Spirit, but man, it makes it a lot tougher. What are the fruits of the Spirit? Well, love. And we talked about that God is love and we're to show love. Joy. If you're angry all the time and you're always mad, and some of us are not as emotional as others. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about people that aren't laughing all the time or having a grin on their face all the time and giggling all the time. But I'm talking about people who just are just unhappy with life, unhappy with their job, unhappy with their family, unhappy with where they live, just unhappy in general. That a fruit of the Spirit is just joy. Once again, we should have contentment. We should have peace with the things that we have in our lives, and we shouldn't be unhappy. So the fruits of the Spirit, love and joy and peace. Are you a person that has peace in your heart, or are you anxious? Are you unsettled? Are you discontent? Right? Those are signs that you've got some spiritual illness going on. Once again, it doesn't mean you're not a Christian. It just means that you're not feeling well spiritually. You just don't realize probably that you're not feeling well spiritually. love, joy, peace, patience. That's a big one. That's one that I was always weak in earlier in my life, but that's one that, as God's been working in my heart, I've become a lot more patient person than what I used to be, at least. Are there more patient people than me? Absolutely, but I have definitely grown a lot in that area. And when we don't have patience, when we're very impatient and discontent, that's a sign of a spiritual illness. So we ought to have love, we ought to have joy, we ought to have peace, we ought to have patience, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, and self-control are the last ones. Would people say that goodness exudes from you, or are you kind of a nasty person that seeks revenge? What about kindness and faithfulness? Are you a faithful person? Do you trust in God even in the most difficult times of life? I mean, think about the heroes of the faith. When everything's going bad, they didn't lose faith, and they didn't always. Hebrews 11 talks about the heroes of the faith, and in that they never. Many of them didn't even receive that which they hoped for and that which they were promised. Abraham didn't fully receive it, and it just goes through people like Samson and Moses and just these great heroes of the faith. That you think about Moses when the people were grumbling, when Moses himself didn't even get to take the people into the promised land because he messed up, but he knew it was coming and he trusted in God. And so faithfulness is such a big one, because life can be really messy, just in terms of all the stuff that we have to deal with in today's society, whether that's persecution for our faith, whether that's disagreements we have with family members because of just our values, our morals, our priorities, just the difficulties with our jobs and trying to pay our bills. I mean, there's a lot of different struggles that we face in this world. The question is are you faithful to God in the midst of it all, or are you not trusting Him? Are you compromising your beliefs, your views, your attitudes, your whatever, because you're afraid that by maintaining faithfulness to Him, you won't be cared for, or you won't be provided for? Faithfulness is huge. So as we are in the middle of the cold and flu season, I just want you to reflect on, how healthy are you spiritually? And if you're not real healthy spiritually, I want to leave you with this last bit of encouragement. When Jesus came into the world, people were kind of getting on him. The religious leaders were getting on him because he kept hanging out with the sinners. And Jesus' response was, well, a doctor comes for the sick, not for the healthy. And so if we're spiritually sick, reach out to Jesus. Jesus is the one that makes us whole, right? He's the one that his word's a lamp to our feet, a light to our path. He promises that He'll be with us always, even to the very end of the age. Whatever your spiritual illness is, lift that up to Jesus in prayer and trust and believe that He hears that prayer and that He's going to answer that prayer. And in the same way that we pray to Him to help us from our own physical ailments, so too should we pray to Him to heal us from our spiritual ailments. Thank you for joining me for this episode of God Talk, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I look forward to talking to you next time.